Alright, welcome to your week 13 lecture at the Texas Bureaucracy. We're on the home stretch. You guys are almost done here, so keep up the good work and you should be good to go. We're going to talk about the bureaucracy. It's going to be a really short lecture today, although I still feel that it's very important to know what the bureaucracy does and how it contributes to the overall function of government. So that being said, let's go ahead and begin with defining the bureaucracy. We encounter the bureaucracy on a daily basis, and it often surrounds us, and it's very there, but we're not often aware exactly of what it does and how it contributes to our daily lives. So the bureaucracy defined, I have two definitions here. Probably for the purpose of your test, just so you know, we'll probably use the second definition, although the first one is also very good as well. So the first definition of bureaucracy is just the agency of government and their employees charged with specific tasks and duties supported by public funding. So it's all the agencies of government and their employees. And so anyone that is employed by the government is usually part of the bureaucracy. And any agency that you can usually think of is also part of the bureaucracy as well. Each agency and each employee have specific tasks and duty, and they're all supported by public funding. So your taxpayer dollars go towards the bureaucracy and their agencies to do particular functions. And we're going to go into a number of bureaucracies today as well. So you'll see that it's not just, it's necessary things. It's not just wasteful government spending. It's usually particularly things that are necessary, such as roads and things like that. So, and parks and recreation, things like that. So anyway, definition number 2 is the set of complex hierarchical departments, agencies, commissions, and staff to help the executive branch carry out its duties. So the bureaucracy is often part of the executive branch. They're part of the governor and the plural executive, like we talked about. They're those particular departments or commissions and agencies and things like that that ensure that the government can function day to day and carries out those particular duties as well. Organization of the bureaucracy usually revolves around structures of the executive departments, agencies, and offices. So like I said, the governor and the plural executive, they're the ones that are usually in control of the bureaucracy itself, or the heads of the bureaucracy, if you will. It's often seen as a fourth branch of government, because while they're part of the executive branch, they're not particularly working for the executive branch. They're working for themselves to ensure that the government can function and that the bureaucracy can handle those particular issues and duties. The function of the bureaucracy, beyond the definition, the bureaucracy really is used to communicate with each other and coordinate all the specializations within their organization. They are mainly used to implement new laws. Implementation of laws is a key function of the bureaucracy. They translate the law into employee routines. Legislation is not self-executing, and it must be implemented by particular agencies. So let's say you have a new law that deals with highways. Well, then you would turn it over to the Department of Transportation, which is part of the bureaucracy. Say you have a new law pertaining to wildlife and hunting and sportsmen clubs and things like that. Then agency of the government that deals with parks, recreation, and wildlife would handle that new law as well. Same thing with maritime law. You can think about here in Galveston, you can think about how the Texas Parks and Recreation and the Texas Texas Trade Commission, they also deal with the ports and maritime law and things like that. So the bureaucracy is pretty big, but it's used to handle special government interests in promoting its own laws and its own functions as well. The bureaucracy in many ways does engage in certain rulemakings. They'll make rules for certain behaviors that you can do. They're also engaged in quasi-judicial decision-making. So let's say someone didn't have a hunting permit or a fishing permit or something like that, then they would be able to exercise their quasi-judicial decision-making and handing out fines and things like that. Same way with the police officers as well. They're part of the bureaucracy in many ways, and they also engage in quasi-judicial decision-making. And like I said, the purpose of that is similar to a fourth branch of government. They're the fourth branch of government. While they're not involved in politics or anything like that, they ensure that the government can function, and they contribute wildly to the functions of government in general. So that's what the bureaucracy does. Who serves in the bureaucracy? Well, the fact is that the government does employ a lot of people, and therefore it does have a wide bureaucracy. But it hasn't always been just, oh, I'll apply for a job in the bureaucracy and I'll get that job. Until the late 19th century, the bureaucracy was mainly a spoils system. It's really changed to what it was today from where it was centuries ago, or yeah, I guess I should say centuries ago, because it has been 2 centuries, the 19th century. Back then, they used what was called the spoils system, which exists in some facets today, but not as much. Back then, under the spoils system, jobs were rewarded to those with connections, particularly to politicians and to people in power. And let's say you were an ardent supporter, you gave a lot of money or something like that. In return for the support, the politicians would reward jobs in the bureaucracy. So if you wanted a good job in the bureaucracy, you just had to be a supporter of a particular politician or a particular person that had power or connections to people in politics. And that's how bureaucracy jobs were rewarded. Now, that was okay back then, although in many ways it got too corrupt. And that's where we really kind of had this flip to what we now call the merit system. Instead of rewarding people with just connections or rewarding people for being good supporters, instead we wanted to kind of have a nonpartisan bureaucracy, because you don't want party politics or politics in general influencing bureaucrats. You don't want them to be discriminatory based on their own political ideologies. And so what happened was we switched from the spoils system, established a new federal law which now prohibits the spoils system, and now we have what is called the merit system. Instead, you have unelected officials. You have people serving in the bureaucracy that are based on their merit and qualifications, meaning their work. Most have college degrees in that particular field. So let's say you're dealing with a transportation issue. Maybe you'll have a degree in civil engineering or something like that. In at large, you have non-partisan offices. So you have people that are qualified, you have people that don't have a political interest involved, that are not trying to introduce corruption at all. You want people that are serving the bureaucracy that don't have a corruption factor, do not have political ideologies influencing their job, and are well qualified based on their level of education or their experience as well. So, continuing with who serves in the bureaucracy, Texas does actually still have a few patronage jobs or spoils jobs, though. Not as many as it used to be. Jobs in the bureaucracy are not simply just rewarded based on the spoils system. However, there are still approximately 3,000 jobs that are awarded through the spoils system. Most are through appointment by the governor, so that's what makes them part of the spoils system or the patronage system, is that they're awarded through appointment by the governor. And so if you want that particular job, you have to be a supporter, and you have to have good connections with the governor itself or the executive branch itself. Heads of agency also have some flexibility to hire spoils as well. So let's say you're in good with a particular head of a particular department, or that you know them personally, you're friends with them or something like that, then that's kind of where the spoils system may come into effect, in that that head of that agency may hire you based on your connections, or may hire a particular person based on their own connections. So that's where the spoils system still exists. It's not as rampant and widespread as it used to be, but it still does pay to know people in power a little bit if you're looking for a job in the bureaucracy itself. For the most part, Texas bureaucratic jobs are rewarded based on the merit system, though. So you had approximately 3,000 jobs that were rewarded on the spoils system. However, when you look at Texas bureaucracy, Texas has a pretty big bureaucracy. For being such a state that believes in small government, it's very unique that Texas has such a widespread bureaucracy. But the fact is that Texas is a large state with a large population, so therefore it needs a large bureaucracy to handle particular issues. So you have 360,000 total employees. Most of them are hired based on the merit system. They're professional and they're experienced. And also the fact that their professional experience also ensures a hierarchy and chain of command that is based on merit as well. So that helps the bureaucracy function a lot more efficiently. The merit system does, because you have this hierarchy and chain of command where you assign responsibilities, and therefore it makes it a lot more efficient for government employees to know their duties and get those particular issues handled. So that's just a little bit about the Texas bureaucracy itself and who serves in it. Note, for the purpose of your test out of these past 2 slides, please know the difference between a merit system and a spoils system. And just know that Texas does have a pretty large bureaucracy. It's mainly merit system now because it's highly professional and experienced and very efficient as well, I guess I should say. So, Functional types of agencies. We like to think of the bureaucracy as just serving one sort of function. The fact is that different agencies serve different functions. There's administrative, there's service agencies, and then there's also regulatory, and we usually call regulatory commissions. So administrative primarily carries out the law established by the legislature. So these would be people such as the Texas Rangers or the police force or things like that serve in the bureaucracy and serve to carry out the laws established by the legislature. It may also be simple things such as maybe an election board or something like that. Service types of agencies. Service agencies perform duties that could be privatized, but legislature has chosen to keep them under the functions of government. This would be things such as transportation and things like that. Building roads and things like that. That could be privatized, but the fact is that the Texas Department of Transportation typically handles the building of highways and things like that. It may also be things, I'm trying to think of some other ones here, oil commissions, trade commissions, things like that. They tend to do things that could be privatized, such as accounting and things like that, but they don't because it's kept under the control of the government. All right, regulatory commissions regulates or controls functions performed in the economy. So the Texas Department, sorry, I'm trying to think here. Environmental regulatory agencies, that's what I was trying to think of. They regulate the pollution out of the oil industry and things like that. So that'd be an example of a regulatory agency or regulatory commission. All right. Employment by function. So here's how the Texas bureaucracy kind of breaks down. So education is probably the largest sector of of employees by the government. Education is part of the bureaucracy. Texas education, particularly in public schools, that's all part of the bureaucracy. Every teacher is a bureaucrat basically because they work for the public or they work for the state government in public schools for public education. So that's an example of a bureaucracy. And education takes up about 35% of the employment in the bureaucracy. Health and Human Services, that's a big section as well, particularly because Texas has such a large population and needs a lot of people that serve in the Health and Human Services on behalf of the Texas government to ensure that their people are healthy and things like that. So things such as county health administrators, you can think of rural clinics, county clinics that you may have visited as well. Those are all part of the Health and Human Services. Public safety, this would be things such as police officers and highway officers and things like that. Business and economic development. Texas has a huge interest in business and economic development, so it'll hire people within government to promote its economic environment to business owners and things like that. Government administration makes sense, environment as well, and then you have the other as well. But just kind of wanted to show you the breakdown of employment in the bureaucracy itself. And we typically think of bureaucrats as people sitting behind desks, working at City Hall and things like that. The fact is that they're actually out and involved in the public at large. Teachers, public safety as well, health and human resources, they're involved in the interest of the public at large on behalf of the Texas government and work for the Texas government in the bureaucracy. All right, so major topics within bureaucracy. Authority is often very important. Funding is huge within the bureaucracy. How do certain bureaucratic agencies get their funding? Personnel structure, administration is a huge topic within the bureaucracy as well. We kind of talked a little bit about how the heads of agencies and things like that, political support, and then oversight. All these things are things to deal with when you talk about the bureaucracy itself. All right, so sources of authority. Let's go ahead and discover that one first. The bureaucracy needs a source for its existence and use of power. So where does it derive that source of authority? Well, the state constitution establishes a number of bureaucratic agencies. The state constitution establishes important regulatory commissions that are deemed necessary for the functions of government. State statutes, state laws, state and federal laws as well. State statutes and state law and federal law are kind of all the same thing, but they all establish necessary bureaucratic agencies. If an issue arises where we need a new bureaucratic agency to tackle that particular problem, then state laws or state statutes can establish that new bureaucratic agency. So that's where the bureaucracy kind of gets its source of existence and its use of power, because usually within those state statutes and state laws, it's outlined what the bureaucratic agency can or can't do. Funding sources. Well, in order to carry out those functions and to exercise your power, you need funds. So in order for bureaucracy to carry out its duties, it needs funds. So there's fee-based funding sources. So let's say a bureaucratic agency saw someone violating a particular rule, they can issue a fee for that. Then those fees go into the budget of the bureaucracy agency to serve their own functions. So fee-based, fees that they hand out, that's a good source of funds. State or federal grants help out tremendously with bureaucracy as well. Free money from the federal state government to exist, that definitely helps out. Dedicated revenue, any revenue from taxes that goes directly into bureaucratic agencies, you can donate in your own taxes. You can donate a set amount of dollars to, say, the Parks and Wildlife Fund of Texas. You can check the little boxes off when you do your taxes. That's called dedicated revenue, tax money that is raised specifically for the purpose of bureaucracy. And then state general revenue, whatever the total budget of the state is, in the state budget they'll allocate certain amounts of dollars to certain bureaucratic agencies, such as the police force and things like that. So state general revenue at large, the overall budget, goes directly to the bureaucracy as well. All right, personnel administration. Well, here in Texas, there is no statewide personnel system. So there's not a particular personnel system that handles just bureaucrats in Texas. But personnel classification and salary system, it does exist. So if you've reached a certain threshold within your career, you're classified in a particular class of personnel. And then also you're classified in a particular salary system based on your merit, based on your work, based on your experience and things like that, and time served as well. So it's managed by the Personnel Classification Office and the State Auditor's Office. They're the ones that manage the personnel administration overall. And then there's informal supervision by the courts. Let's say the courts see a particular bureaucratic agency is not necessary or things like that, or in violation of a law, the courts can step in and manage the personnel of that particular bureaucratic agency. All right, state employee retirement systems, teachers' retirement system, and the employees' retirement system. That helps manage the personnel within the Texas bureaucracy. And then also for the bureaucracy, there's a statewide health insurance system. And so these all deal with the personnel administration of the bureaucracy. All right, public support. Well, there's obviously general support from the public for law enforcement, public education, health services, and major universities. These are the four bureaucratic agencies, or just quit saying bureaucratic agencies. These are the four sectors of the bureaucracy that the public generally supports. They like law enforcement. Law enforcement is a huge part of the bureaucracy, and it helps them feel safe and protected and to handle issues of crime and things like that within their neighborhoods. General support from the public is often placed for public education as well. The general public generally supports public education because more education means a smarter society, means a more economically developed society as well. Going along with public education also is major universities as well. So you can kind of put those two together. Polls show that the public at large supports public education and major universities, once again because of the economic impacts it can have. And then health services. There is general support from the public for health services. You want a happy and healthy society, not only for yourself and for your kids, but for the public at large, because a healthy public is a more efficient public as well, and it just is health and happiness kind of go hand in hand. All right, so interest group support. Well, interest groups largely support insurance departments, park and wildlife, major universities, and licensing agencies. Interest groups have a huge impact on these sorts of things. So you can think of interest groups that are interested in the environment, for example. They'll throw major support behind parks and wildlife, people of the bureaucracy that serve in parks and wildlife, because that's an environmental kind of thing. It's environmental protection and sorts like that. So interest groups have kind of a niche sort of interest, but they do support bureaucrats and the bureaucracy that handle issues that they're interested in as well. And that's kind of where you get the idea of iron triangles. Iron triangles are a little difficult to explain, but when you think about the government at large, you can see how these iron triangles do exist. They're often called cozy little triangles, if you will, cozy little triangles. These are just close relationships among powerful actors that keep the average citizen, I guess I should say, average citizen out of participating without an interest group. So these triangles, the give and take of these triangles, which you're going to see in the next slide, ensure that the average citizen will join an interest group to actually voice their opinion to, say, the legislative branch or to the bureaucracy. It sets a clientele model to ensure give and take, and you're going to see this in the next slide here. The concern is over capture. So special interest groups get control over the executive branch agencies and members of Congress to get benefits that others do not. So I know this was a text-heavy slide. I think I'm gonna flip to the next slide and then come back to this, and you're gonna see how iron triangles really do work out. These close relationships among powerful actors. This is basically what an iron triangle is. You have the legislature, you have a bureaucratic agency, and you have an interest group down here as well. And so interest groups are generally what the average citizen participates in. They participate in this interest group down here. And they're going to lobby bureaucratic agencies, and they're also going to provide contributions and information to legislative committees and lobby those as well. So this is where the average citizen comes in with the interest groups. Over here you have the bureaucratic agency. Well, the bureaucratic agency gives to interest groups. They give them programs, contracts, and regulations as well. Bureaucratic agencies deal with the interest groups, the commoners, I guess, if you will, the public at large. They'll give them programs, information, contracts, and regulations, and things like that, and then promise to serve those interest groups better. There's also give and take between bureaucratic agencies and legislative committees. They give them constituent benefits, basically. The bureaucratic agency will work for the public at large, which benefits the legislative committee, because if the bureaucracy is working efficiently for the public, then those legislative committees and those legislative those legislative representatives are very happy because their constituents are happy. The legislative committee gives them jurisdiction, budget, and promotions as well. They can decide promotions. They can give them more money for that bureaucratic agency for doing a good job. And then legislative committees give their interest groups, they give them access for talking, they give them policy appointments as well. So they give the interest groups or the public at large particular policies. So that's just kind of an idea of an iron triangle. You can kind of see the give and take. All three of these things work together to make sure that the government is progressing, is more efficient, and there's a wealth of information on a particular, say, interest or a particular problem within the government. So that's the idea of an iron triangle. Going back one slide, it's once again just those close relationships among powerful actors that keep the average citizen out. But if there's an interest group, and there's actually an interest group that shows a vested interest, a large swath of support for their interest, then you can see this iron triangle really taking effect. There's the give and take, and it really makes sure that government is acting efficiently. So it sets this clientele model up. You give me something, I'll give you something in return. It ensures this give and take. There's this aspect of capture that actually makes sure that they're getting stuff done. And then the special interest groups get control over executive branch agencies and members of Congress to get benefits that others do not get. You may have a free rider problem there a little bit, but if those iron triangles are working efficiently, then you're going to have a very effective government that has a give and take, and politics can move on and progress and so forth. So it may be a little confusing. We don't often think in the mindset of iron triangles, but they do exist. So if you have any questions about the iron triangles and how it pertains to bureaucracy itself, please send those questions my way. I'll gladly try to explain them just a little bit more. But I hope this kind of illustrates how government kind of operates with the bureaucratic agencies as a major actor in government policy making, or government policy and government functions. All right. Here in Texas, this is very unique in Texas. We need to talk about bureaucratic oversight. When I talk about bureaucracy in my federal government class, you can see that there's not a lot of oversight of the bureaucracy. But here in Texas, they want to ensure that the government, when it does do something, that it is very efficient. They want to make sure that there's oversight and responsibility and accountability within government. So that's why here in Texas you have the Sunset Commission. It's executive oversight. You have what are called comptroller performance reviews. So there's somebody in a particular office that oversees everything that's going on. You also have the Council on Competitive Government, and then you have the Governor's Budget Office as well. So all of these things ensure that the bureaucracy is acting efficiently, acting according to guidelines, and actually carrying out their duties. All of these things are trying to do that. There's the performance reviews. Obviously, that's direct accountability for the employees. There's the Council on Competitive Government. They want to make sure that the bureaucracy is efficient in being competitive. And then you have the Governor's Budget Office. That's kind of looks at sort of things and says, well, that bureaucratic agency isn't doing very well, or it's not doing its job. Let's take the budget away from them, kind of give them incentive to do better in future years and things like that. And let's reward those that are being competitive and have high performance standards. Those all come from the executive branch. And then there's the legislative oversight. The legislative branch, both the Senate and the House, have a vested interest in the bureaucracy doing very well as well. I think that's kind of bad. Doing a good job as well, I guess you should say. Because remember those iron triangles. So you have standing committees that oversee particular bureaucratic agencies. And then you have statutory committees such as the Budget Board, the Audit Committee as well, which audits bureaucratic agencies. That's how the legislative branch gets involved in the bureaucracy as well. And then there's also media attention. Those sort of things, the media can draw attention to a bureaucracy that may be corrupt or has a huge scandal behind it. The media will definitely get on that, and media attention can kind of name and shame what's going on. So let's go ahead and talk about the Sunset Commission. I know I kind of skipped over that in the last slide, but it's very, very important. The Sunset Advisory Commission. The membership of the Sunset Advisory Commission is 5 senators, plus a public member that is appointed by the Lieutenant Governor. Remember I mentioned the spoils system earlier? This is an example where knowing the Lieutenant Governor in particular, and being in the favor of the Lieutenant Governor can really pay off, because there's this public member that is assigned to the Sunset Advisory Commission. And there's also 5 House members plus the public member appointed by the Speaker. So the spoils system, knowing the Speaker, could name you as the public member of the Sunset Advisory Commission. So you have 12 people serving on the Sunset Advisory Commission, 5 plus 1 plus 5 plus 1. The Sunset Advisory Commission, their main duty is to appoint staff. They want to appoint staff based on their merit, and they want to make sure that the bureaucracy is being awarded, or bureaucratic jobs are being awarded on merit, professionalism, and experience. They also review agencies on a scheduled basis. They want to ensure oversight, so they review these agencies on a scheduled basis to make sure that they're doing their job well. And then they can also recommend abolition of a bureaucratic agency if it's very corrupt or it's not doing its job well enough. Combination. They may recommend combination if there are 2 bureaucratic agencies which are carrying out similar functions, but there's no need for having those 2 separate agencies. They can recommend a combination, meaning that they'll combine those 2 departments together and then recommend ways to do that. And then also reestablishment of state agencies. So let's say an issue kind of went away for a little while, now it's back, they can reestablish that agency. Or let's say an agency was brought down because of corruption or not doing its job well enough, they can reestablish it as well if it is necessary. So the Sunset Advisory Commission is very important in ensuring that our bureaucracy is not only efficient but also doing its job very well. And it's very unique because that's in contrast to the federal government, which just doesn't have these sorts of advisory commissions. It doesn't tend to oversee as much or provide a lot of oversight. Texas is very interested in making sure that government is within control and doing its job. So that's the idea of the Sunset Advisory Commission. All right, so I believe that's the end of the slides. Yes, it is. That's the end of the bureaucracy lecture. These are your discussion board questions. If you have any questions about the bureaucracy, though, please send those my way. It's not something we often think about, but we encounter it on a daily basis, so it's very important to know about. All right, so discussion board questions. Very first one, I want you to Google just Texas bureaucratic agencies. Just Google Texas bureaucratic agencies. I guess I didn't put the second quotations there, so please forgive me. Texas bureaucratic agencies. And then I want you to visit the first link that pops up. It should be something like state agency list from the Texas State Libraries and Archives, from TSLAC, Texas State Libraries and Archives Commission, or something like that. Visit that first link, though, the state agency list. Sort through all the bureaucratic agencies. I want you to literally look through, just scroll, please scroll through all of the bureaucratic agencies here in Texas. There are a ton of them. But sort through them, look for them, and then I want you to pick one that handles an issue you're interested in. So let's say you're interested in hunting and fishing. Find a bureaucratic agency that deals with hunting and fishing. Say that you're interested in education. Find one that deals with education. Maybe you're interested in the ocean and maritime law. Find one that deals with that or something like that. Geography. There's one that deals with geography as well. Something that handles an issue that you're interested in. There's a ton of them. You'll see how big the bureaucracy here in Texas. Describe what does this agency do. Give me a little bit of background on it, and then tell me why you picked it, beyond the fact that you're interested in it. Maybe you wanted to know more about this particular agency. And then also tell me, what are they in charge of? What do they oversee? What do they handle on a day-to-day basis and things like that? So just kind of explore the bureaucracy a little bit. That's what I'm trying to do here. I want you to get exposed to the Texas bureaucracy and what it does. All right. And then finally, second, I want you to read pages 188 through 188 through 190. Sorry, 188 through 190 in your textbook. In your textbook, it'll provide a comparison between Texas and Bavaria, which is a state within Germany. I want you to compare those two, and I also want you to read through page 190 because I want you to kind of see what the difference between the spoil system versus the merit system is. All right, so compare Texas and Bavaria, and then is the Texas bureaucracy too complex? Also consider your first answer here as well. Is the Texas bureaucracy too complex? As soon as you sorted through all this list, you may kind of feel like it's too complex, but I want you to actually go ahead and answer. Is the Texas bureaucracy too complex? Should we simplify the organizational structure into something simpler like Bavaria? Or is the number of departments Texas has necessary given the size and diversity of our state? Consider the number of employees that the Texas bureaucracy has. Also consider the size of the departments in your answer, and then also consider the size of Texas in your answer, and maybe that will kind of give you a perspective on how necessary the bureaucracy is, or how unnecessary the bureaucracy is, because it is very complex and there's a lot of departments. So just give me your opinion, basically. Tell me whether you think it's too complex, whether we should simplify it, or whether it's good and it is doing an efficient job. So. All right, so those are your two discussion board questions. If you have any questions in general, though, send them my way about the class, about the bureaucracy, about anything that I covered today, and I will leave you on that. I will see you guys next week. Have a good one.